Masechet Baba Batra, Daf, Kof Chaf Aleph. We begin with 7 explanations for why Tu Be'av is a happy day. We begin with the Mishnah in Masechet Ta'anit Tinan Hatam. Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Lo hayu yamim tovim l'Yisrael kachamisha asar Be'av, u'cheyom HaKippurim, shebehen benot Yerushalayim yosot, bechle lavan she'ulin, shelo levayesh et mi she'en lo. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says that there were no greater happy days in Israel as much as the 15th of Av and the day of Yom Kippur. On those 2 days of the year, the daughters of Israel would go out into the fields in white borrowed clothing in order not to embarrass someone who does not have it, so that someone poor who cannot afford such not just clothing would borrow from someone else, and everyone would be borrowing. And so therefore it was not a fashion contest of who's rich and who's poor and what they can afford, but rather everybody would be dressed in the same way. And then the eligible bachelors would go out, and the women would invite themselves to be courted, and lots of couples would get together and get married. So that made it a very happy day. But they didn't just pick 2 random days of the year to do this, but they picked the days that already were happy, and since everybody is in a joyous and good mood, so then they would be in the mood also to go out on dates and get married. So what's special about these 2 dates? Bishlama Yom Kippurim Yom Selicha u'Mechila Yom Shinitnu Bo Luchot Ha'achronot Ela Chamisha Asar Be'av Maihi. We understand why Yom Kippur is a happy day. We generally think of it as a very serious day, but it also has a happy side of it, which is it's a day of pardon and forgiveness. We're very happy that through our teshuvah process and fasting and all that, we can wipe our slates clean and we can be forgiven. So that's a great feeling, and that makes you want to start a new start, and maybe a new start in through marriage. And it's also the day on which the second luchot were finally given. Moshe went up and got the first luchot, and they did chet ha'egel, and he smashed them, and he had to go up again and ask for forgiveness. And then finally he went up and brought down the second luchot, and he came down on Yom Kippur. So these 2 things actually go together, because it is a day of forgiveness, because that's the day when finally Hashem forgave Bnei Israel and gave the second luchot after the first ones were broken. The original berit was ripped up, but now this is a replacement berit, so it actually symbolizes a marriage or remarriage between Bnei Israel and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So certainly an appropriate date for the young men and women also to arrange their marriages. It's hard to imagine Yom Kippur during the middle of the fasting, during the break sometime, they're also going out on dates, but so that's the way it was. And I remember growing up after on Yom Kippur night, after the tefillot were done outside of Bet Knesset, it actually was a social scene, which was a pretty nice social scene. So you can try to imagine what it was like back then. Okay, so that's Yom Kippur. But the 15th of Av, what about that? What happened on the 15th of Av that it was such a special day that they chose this day also to have these marriage ceremonies? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shemuel Yom Shu Teru Shevatim. So here's the first of the 7 opinions. On this day, the tribes were permitted to marry each other. This is after the Benot Zelofchad, a decision that said any daughter who inherits cannot marry into any other tribe. We saw yesterday that did not necessarily exclude the daughters of Zelofchad themselves. They might have been an exception and were allowed to marry whoever they wanted, but anyone else in that generation, any other daughters who inherited in that generation, had to marry within the tribe so that the land would not veer off and go into another tribe if they married someone from another tribe. However, that only applied to the first generation, not to the second one. And so when that ended, the end of that first generation, and then the second generation began, then this law no longer applied. And this was a happy day, and actually has to do with marriage. So it makes sense that you do this arranging of marriages on this day, because now all of a sudden, all these women who were restricted beforehand and could only marry a limited group of people within their tribe, now they can marry everybody. So you'd make a nice big speed dating ceremony. That makes sense. My Derosh, what's the source from which we know that this law applies only in the first generation? The same source we mentioned yesterday. Zeh hadavar, davar zeh lo yehe noheg ela bedor zeh. Because it says this is the law. So why make a limiting word? This as opposed to what? So it means this law applies only in this generation, but after that it will not apply anymore. So when the last of the people of that generation to whom it applied was gone, I guess they were married or died, and now the next generation came up, so that was a day of celebration. Second opinion, Rabba bar bar Chana amar Rabbi Yochanan. מיום שהותר שבט בנימין לבוא בקהל דכתיב ואיש ישראל נשבע במספר לאמור איש ממנו לא ייתן ביתו לבנימין אלא אישה מה דרוש ממנו ולא מבנינו. Second opinion of Rabbi Yochanan is this is the day when the tribe of Binyamin were allowed to marry into the other tribes. This is after the terrible incident of Pilegesh Bagiv'ah, when there was, because of that incident, a civil war. All the tribes went and they wiped out the tribe of Binyamin almost totally, leaving only 600 men alive. And they had to find some women for those men, and no one was allowed to marry into that tribe. And so this was a terrible thing. Everybody swore, all the other tribes made a swear that nobody would marry into the tribe of Binyamin. But this did not last forever. It was only for one generation. So after that generation finished, and now those survivors and those 600 men and the wives that they were able to get from Yavesh Gilad who had children, so from the second generation on, all of those children were allowed to marry any of the other tribes. And so this was a day of celebration, and again related to marriage, so it makes sense that they would have a speed dating scene to now all these new people that can get married. Now, how do you know this? It applied only to the first generation, because the Pasuk says, Mimenu. Anyone from among these people may not give their children to may not give his daughter. None of us, Mimenu, shall give his daughter to Binyamin as a wife. So it only applies to us, but not to their children. If their children want to give their daughters to Binyamin as a wife, then it is permitted. So that's how we know it only lasted for one generation. Rav Dimi bar Yosef amar Rav Nachman Yom shekalu bo mete midbar damar mor ad shelo kalu mete midbar lo haya dibur im Moshe shnimar vehi kasher tamu kol anshe milchama lamut mikerav ha'am usmich lev edaber Hashem elai lemor elai haya hadibur. Rav Dimi, the son of Yosef, in the same name of Rav Nachman, said, this is the day on 15th of Av, is the day on which the generation of the desert stopped dying. There's a related midrash that every year on the 9th of Av, everybody would dig their own graves and see who would die that year. And then in the morning, they'd say, say, okay, everybody wake up. And they'd see who didn't wake up. They died overnight. And everybody else lived till the next year. But over the course of the 40 years, everyone died out. On the last year, when there was the last generation of those who were destined to die, died on the 9th of Av, and then there was 7 days of mourning, and then on the 15th of Av, that's it. It was a happy day because there would be no more dying in the desert. Now it was all the second generation, all those who were under 20, who survived, who will survive. So all those who died finished dying. And so that was a happy day. The master says that until all the people in the wilderness stopped dying, the prophetic voice did not speak to Moshe. As the pasuk in the beginning of Devarim says, that when the men of war finished dying, the men who were eligible for war, that all died out in the desert, when they finished dying, and then the very next pasuk says, Hashem spoke to Moshe and told him. So you see that there's one right after the other. So we can infer from this that Hashem did not speak to Moshe while the people were dying. This might might relate to what Rambam says, that one cannot get prophecy when in a state of depression. You have to be in a state of happiness and confidence. That's how Rambam explains why there is little or no prophecy outside of Israel in exile, because we're too persecuted and so on. And so, therefore, Moshe did not receive prophecy during those 38 years. This is somewhat surprising because there actually are stories where Hashem speaks to Moshe, like in the story of Korach, and that happens after Chet HaMeraglim and before the end. So it must mean, as the Rishonim point out, that it was a certain level of prophecy that Moshe was not able to receive during that time, kind of level of prophecy of Har Sinai. That was before Chet HaMeraglim, the highest level. That's what Moshe got before. But in the meantime, while people were dying, although it does say that Hashem spoke to Moshe, it would not have been at the same level at least. But anyway, according to this, Midrash says the prophetic voice stopped. It sounds like it's all together, but maybe it means stopped in some way. Ula Amar, Yom Shebitel Bo Hoshea Ben Ela Pardesaot Shoshib Yerobam Ala Derachim Shelo Ya'alu Yisrael La Regel. Ula says on the 15th of Av is the day that Hoshea ben Ela stopped the guards that Yerovam ben Nevat put on the roads so that the people would not go to Yerushalayim for the holidays. Yerovam, he's the one that broke away the northern kingdom from the southern kingdom, the son of Shlomo, breaking it into two kingdoms. And he did not want people in the north, his kingdom, to go down south to the Bet HaMikdash to celebrate, because once they went down south, then their allegiance would be to the south. And so he put guards and stop people from going down, and instead put two idolatrous holy places with egels in the north, so that people would go and worship there. When that was stopped later on, in the time of Hoshea, it happened on Tu B'Av, and so that was a happy day. You can call this kind of the rejoining of the north and the south. So that would also symbolize, in a similar way, the joining together of these couples. Rav Matana Amar, Yom Shenitenu Haruge Betar Likbura Damar Matana. Oto Hayom Shenitenu Haruge Betar Likbura Tiknu B'Yavne Hatov HaMetiv Hatov Shelo Hisricho VaMetiv Shenitenu Likbura. The Matana said that on the 15th of Av is the day in which those who were killed in Betar were allowed to be buried. This is talking about during the Bar Kokhba revolt, the Hadrian persecutions. Those who were killed by the Romans were, as punishment, the Romans said, you're not allowed to bury them, which would be it's not bad enough that they were killed, but also they'd have to, they wouldn't get the respect of a proper burial. Eventually, that decree was rescinded, and the Jews were able to bury their dead, and so that was a happy day. And Ramatana further said that on that day in Yavne, they added a fourth beracha to Birkat HaMazon, the beracha that we still say, Hatov HaMetiv. What's good and even better, it's good that the bodies did not decompose all that time, and HaMetiv, and Hashem does a lot, very good, that they were able to finally be buried, so that they didn't decompose the whole time, and that finally they were able to come to rest. All that happened on that decree was rescinded, and they buried them on the 15th of Av, so that was a happy day ever thereafter. Rabba v'Rav Yosef Tamret Harvaihu Yom sheposkin bo melichrot asim lama'aracha. The last and seventh answer is that this is the day every year in which we stop cutting wood for the Bet HaMikdash, for the Mizbeach. They'd have to cut wood because you have a Esh Tamid, you have an everlasting fire on the Mizbech, so it needs a lot of wood, and different people would donate wood. So they'd be cutting wood all summer long until the 15th of Av, when they stopped. Because if they cut it from before that, and then they leave it out in the sun, it will dry, and it will be good firewood, nice and dry. But once the 15th of Av comes, then already it's not as hot, the days are not as long, and that wood will be too moist. Anything that's cut after the 15th will be too moist to use as good firewood. So this was the cutoff time, literally the cutoff time for not cutting down the trees anymore. And so this was a happy day because they had to work very hard before that to make sure that they had enough firewood firewood for the Mizbeach. And so after working so hard and storing up a lot of wood, now they knew that they were all set and they could stop doing that work and celebrate the fact that they had done all that good hard work. Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol Omer, Kevan she'yagach misha asar be'av tashash kocha shel chama ve'lo hayu koretin asim lama'aracha. We have a baraita that supports this time period. Rabbi Eliezer, the great one, said that once the 15th of Av comes, then the power of the sun is weakened, and so they would no longer cut down trees for the Mizbeach. Amar Rab Menashe ve'karule Yom Tevar Magal. They would call the 15th day of Av the day of the breaking of the sickle, because they didn't need the sickle, the saws that they used to cut down the trees anymore. They could put them away, and because they didn't have to use them anymore, they called it the day of the breaking of the sickle, when they could finally rest. Mikan ve'elach de Mosif Yosif ve'she'eno Mosif Yesif. Ma Yesif? Tanei Rav Yosef tikbereh imeh. From then on, since the days are getting longer and longer after the summer solstice, which is around the 15th of Av, he who adds to his nightly Torah study will add years to his life. But someone who does not add to his Torah study at night, during the growing nights and then into the winter, Yesif, he will be gathered up. What does Yesif mean? Rav Yosef has a braita that explains it means his mother will bury him, meaning he'll die young during his mother's lifetime. So during the day when there's a lot of farm work to do, so it's hard to find time to learn Torah, and the nights are short. There's no one bothering you at night, so it's understandable that there's not that much time to get a lot of Torah study in. But once the winter comes, and without ability to do any work at night, any farm work, which is 95% of people were farmers, so the nights are nice and long, and all you need is a little candle, and you can learn Torah, or you know it by heart. You don't even need a candle or the moonlight, and so the nights should be devoted to Torah study, and that will lead to long life. All right, that's the end of that section. And now we have another 7. Tenor Rabbanan. Shiv'a kipelu et kol ha'olam kulo. Metushelach ra'adam. Shem ra'a metushelach. Yaakov ra'a et Shem. Amram ra'a et Yaakov. Achia Shiloni ra'a et Amram. Eliyahu ra'a et Achia Shiloni. Ve'adayin kayam. A Baraita teaches that we can span the entire history of civilization within the lifetimes of 7 people. These are 7 people that lived a very long time, and they overlap with each other, so that these 7 individuals altogether would have been alive throughout all of human history. And the first of them is Metushelach. He is the grandfather of Noach, and he lived 969 years. The longest in that entire genealogy of people. And he was alive when Adam was alive. In fact, if you do the math, this is true. It's also true that his son Lemech also would have seen Adam. Noach is the first person who would have been born after Adam died. So, but even though Lemech was also alive, Metushelach lived longer than Lemech, outlasted him. So therefore, Metushelach is the first person on the list. He saw Adam, and he lived a long time afterwards. Shem, he knew Metushelach, and Yaakov, he saw Shem. A lot of midrashim about Yaakov studying in the yeshiva of Shem. And Amram saw Yaakov, and Achia Hashiloni, he saw Amram. Achia Hashiloni was a Levi and a prophet in the time of the Mishkan at Shiloh, and through the reign of King Shlomo. There are a lot of other midrashim about him, that he lived a very long time. In Divrei Yamim says he wrote a book all about the reign of Shlomo, so already according to that, he lived quite a long time, from the time of the Mishkan in Shiloh till the end of the reign of Shlomo. And the Midrashim also associate him with a different Achiyah, who lived even before that, so he lived a long time, and he knew Amram. And then Eliyahu, he lived at the same time as Achia Shiloni, and Eliyahu never died. He's still alive. And so there you go. With these 7 individuals, we can span all of history. Achia Shiloni ra'at Amram. Now, is it true that Achia Shiloni would have seen Amram? V'haketiv v'lo notar mehem ish ki im Kaleb ben Yefuneh v'Yoshua bin Nun. After all, it says that nobody from the generation of the desert survived and went into Israel except for Kaleb ben Yefuneh and Yoshua bin Nun. Now, Amram, he died before Moshe, and so he was not part of the generation of the spies. He was not around anymore. So therefore, it must be that Achia Shiloni, if he saw Amram, he was from that generation. That would have been over 20 years old when they left Egypt. Now, if he was over 20 years old, Achia himself, when they left Egypt, then he would have died in the desert as part of that generation, because only Yoshua and Caleb survived and not Achia. And therefore, Eliyahu Hanavi, who was not yet alive, would not have been able to see Achia. So how could it be that Achia spanned both of those generations? Amar Rab Hamnuna, lo nigzera gezerah al shibto shel Levi. And we have an important chidush here, that the decree against the generation of the Meraglim did not apply to the tribe of Levi. And since Achia Shiloni was from the tribe of Levi, he did not die. None of the people in the tribe of Levi died out in the desert. They all went into the land of Israel, even though they were from the generation of those who left Egypt. What an amazing chidush. How do we know? Dichti b'midbar hazeh yipelu pigrechem v'chol pekudechem lechol misparchem miben 20 shana v'ma'ala. Mi shepekudav ben 20 v'yasa shibto shel Levi shepekudav miben 30. We learn from the pasuk that says, this is the wording of the decree, in this desert will fall all of your carcasses and all those who are counted according to the number of those who are more than 20 years old. So in a simple reading, it just means that anyone who right now is more than 20 years old, or from 20 years old and up, will die in the desert. That's a simple reading. But here, you see, it's pretty wordy. Kol pikudechem lechol misparchem. So this midrash is reading it as anyone who in the census was counted from 20 years and up, those people will die in the desert. But Levi, their census was different from everybody else's. They were counted from 30 years and up. The reason probably is because the other tribes, they were counted to see who's ready for war. A 20-year-old, anybody from 20 and up, would be conscripted to go to war. Levi, however, who did not generally fight, but that needed an extra 10 years to learn all the laws and details of the things that happen in the Mishkan and the Torah in general. They're the keepers of the Torah and the teachers and the judges, so they needed that further training, and only when they're 30 years old, then they can go and start serving as Leviim. So in any case, because their census counting is not from 20 years old, but from 30 years old, they are not included in the decree. The decree applies to those who, not literally those who are 20 years old, but rather those who in the census are counted from 20 years old, and that is not Levi. And therefore, Achia, who was a Levi, did not die in the desert. Now, is it true that these are the only exceptions, Yoshua, Caleb, and the Leviim, and there's nobody else from any other tribe that survived the desert and went into the land of Israel? We have a Braita that says, Yair the son of Menashe and Machir the son of Menashe, they were born at the time of Yaakov, and they lived a very long time, and they did not die with that generation, but rather they went into the land of Israel and only died after that. How do we know? Shneimar vayakum mehem anshe ha'ai k'shloshim shisha v'shisha ish v'tanya shloshim v'shisha mamash divrei Rabbi Yehuda. It comes from the following derivation that says the pasuk in Yoshua that when Bnei Israel fought against the Ai, at first they lost, and the men of Ai killed about 36 men. What do you mean about 36 men? What does that mean? So we have two opinions in the Baraita. One, Rabbi Yehuda says it's 36, precisely 36. Amar lo Rabbi Nechemia v'chi ne'emar shilshim v'shisha v'lo ne'emar ela kishloshim v'shisha. Rabbi Nechemia says if it was exactly 36, Pasuk would have said 36 people were killed, but it says about 36. So what does that mean? It can't mean literally. Rather, it's referring to Yair alone. Yair, the son of Menashe, he by himself, it was so great that he was equivalent to a majority of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is 71 people, so a majority of the Sanhedrin is 36. But in fact, it says like about 36 people, because it wasn't 36 people, it was really only one person, but it was one person who is equivalent to 36 people. But in fact, it was only Yair ben Menashe. According to the Rabbi Nechemia, Yair ben Menashe was still alive when they entered Israel. Already they finished. They fought Yericho, and now they fought the Ai. He died fighting the Ai, but that means he was still around. He was born way before, and he survived in the desert. So how could it be? He would have been very old even when they left Egypt. He would have been above 60, as we're about to see. But we thought that anyone above 20 from any other tribe besides Levi should have died in the desert. But here, Yair, who was above 20, in fact, he was probably much older, and yet he's not from Levi, and yet he lived and went into the land of Israel and only died later in the land of Israel. Another chidush. We thought everybody died in the desert. Now we're learning lots of exceptions. That the decree against those, the generation of the spies, did not apply to anyone lower than 20. That we knew already. That's explicit in the Pasuk. It also did not apply to the elders, anyone above 60. They might have died a natural death anyway out in the desert, but if they lived long enough, then there was no decree against them, and they could have come into the land of Israel. So that would apply to Yair, who was very old. He was born during the time of Yaakov and was still around, so that would have been certainly a very long time. So we know that people less than 20 did not die in the desert, because that's in the wording of the original decree. Only from 20 years and up, says the word v'ma'ala. We're going to use this word for gezerah shava. Velo al yater mi ben shishim gamar v'ma'ala v'ma'ala me'arachin. Ma'ala lan yater mi ben shishim kepachot mi ben asrim. Afkan yater mi ben shishim kepachot mi ben asrim. This gezerah shava is from the section of Arachin. If someone says, I'm going to donate my worth or the worth of that person over there to the Bet HaMikdash, and he does it as in the language of Arachim, according to the preset value of a person that the Torah designates, depending on their gender and their age. And so the ages are between 20 and 60 is 50 shekalim, but under 20 is less and over 60 is less. Those are different amounts, but they're both less than someone between 20 and 60. And over there, when it talks about someone 60 and older, it says the word va'ma'la, same word as here. So therefore we learn, just like regarding the laws of arachin, the evaluations of a person that someone donates, the ages less than 20 and more than 60 are similar in that they're different from someone between 20 and 60. So too here, where in the decree against the generation of the spies, where it says under 20, but it also says from 20 v'ma'ala, says the word v'ma'ala, we can learn that just like regarding arachim, there's a bracket between 20 and 60, and then more than 60 is not the same bracket, the payment is less, and also under 20 the payment is less. So there's a similarity between under 20 and over 60 regarding arachin, and it uses the word v'ma'ala there. So too there must be a similarity between under 20 and over 60 regarding the decree against the spies. And so, since we know that under 20 did not die, therefore we learn that those over 60 also did not die in the wilderness. And that's how Yair, the son of Menashe, who was already older, elder did not die in the wilderness. We therefore learn a really important lesson that not everybody died in the wilderness. Those under 20, those over 60 didn't die. The tribe of Levi didn't die. And among the tribe of Levi is Achia Hashiloni. And so therefore we can confirm the original Braita that we saw up above, that through 7 people we can span all of the lifetimes from Adam until today. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.